Hello and welcome to the Geeky Brummie Podcast. Joining me today, as always, Miss Keith Bluefield, welcome.
Hello, Ryan.
Mr. Matt Lovell is in the house.
Hello, hello.
And mainly leading proceeding today is Mr. Leigh Price.
Hello.
And I'm your host, Mr. Ryan Parrish. Today, coming up on the show, we'll be talking all things PlayStation, having a few PlayStation memories, and with the loss of the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita store, we'll be having a look at what games are disappearing into the ether forever. We'll also be having a look at Amazon Prime's new adult comic book series, Invincible, plus your comics roundup and your games of the week. But for now...
What's happening to you these days? Having lots of fun? Believe me, I know some folks that are in for some fun.
Take a minute. See what's in it.
But you can see how dangerous this could be.
But first, we're going to have a little fun tonight, folks.
It's time for the Geeky Brummie Podcast.
So, gentlemen, what have been up to the last few weeks since we recorded? Let's start off with Leigh. Leigh, what have you been up to?
Well, I have been... what have I been up to? I've been playing various things from my backlog again, which I'm chipping away at quite nicely, actually. I've currently been playing through Haven, which came out at the end of last year. Sort of like sci-fi romance game, which is an interesting combination. It is essentially like a sort of survival exploration type game. It's about a couple that have fled their home world onto this other planet, and they're just trying to sort of stay hidden on this planet. And it's just got some really good relationship writing in it. So basically, they feel like an actual couple the way they're written. But like most of the game, you'll be sort of wandering around this planet trying to find resources for food and trying to sort of clear up some of the areas that have been kind of corrupted by this weird alien stuff that they've got there. And it's just kind of exploring and uncovering the mystery of this strange planet that they've landed on. And it's a really interesting game. I've just been playing it on Game Pass. So...
Yeah, sounds like something definitely worth playing. Not something I've picked up yet, but Game Pass is a wonderful having.
Yes.
So much stuff you can never get through it all.
Yeah.
I see Grand Theft Auto 5 is returning to Game Pass again soon. It's like the umpteenth time for me never managed to finish it.
Although only for like console, I noticed, because I've noticed that the upcoming month is really bad for PC.
Yeah,
I think it's like one game coming to PC, and it's like some really obscure indie game that I've never heard of in my life. So that's
yeah, and everything else from GTA 5 seems to be ghost sports for the console players.
I mean, I think, to be fair though, like last month did have all the games in the world for PC, especially because the EA stuff came in as well. So
and Bethesda as well.
And just the 20 Bethesda games. That still just take up most of the front page right now.
It's like, here's everything, now go play. Keith, what have you been up to the last couple of weeks?
Thanks to Bethesda putting all its games on Game Pass, I managed to finally play the final level of Wolfenstein what is it called?
Youngblood?
New Order?
New Order.
New Order. Yeah. Because when it was last on Game Pass, I'd played it up until I was up to the final level, and then they took it off. And I thought, I'm never going to complete this game. So it only took about 20 minutes, but finally I managed to get that played.
Did it end with Blue Monday? Please tell me it ends with Blue Monday.
No, it just ended. It just ended with certain characters demising, which is quite good. So now I can go on and play the rest of the Wolfenstein series. Now I've finished that one.
Play Dishonored.
Yeah, I do want to play that, mostly because I saw a Jinx TV show once, which was the most comedy gaming moment I'd ever seen. They were playing through that game, and there was there was a character, non-playing character, who stood behind a gate, and the commentary was just like, "No, you can go up behind him. Nothing will happen. He won't do anything." And then that bloke turned around and killed the character that was playing, and I just thought that's me playing that game. So I will play that. I also watched Godzilla vs Kong over the weekend, which was entertaining. I didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoyed King of the Monsters, although I know a lot of people didn't dig that one either. It's still not quite as good as the original Toho Godzillas. You know,
I've heard there's a lot of too much humans in it. Like, go away if you want to watch big monkeys slapping.
I think it's the fact that what the humans have to do just makes no sense. They just seem to be wandering around the background, like going, this has no impact on anything else that's happening in the entire movie, but we're just moving from scene to scene in order that you see some humans at some point.
I take it the leak that was buried in the trailer of a certain other big monster turning up is pretty much there.
Yeah, that's all in there. But you know, the bits with Kong and Godzilla are pretty good. You know, the animation is pretty excellent. It's just not the same as the Toho's, even like the later 2000 Toho's, or even Shin Godzilla, which is still the best post 2000 Godzilla that we've had. Except never watch the dubbed version, kids. It's terrible.
I did see that weird GameSpot review of this movie where they pretty much complained that the writing was terrible, and all you're going to get out of it is just, you know, Kong battling Godzilla. And it's like, that's kind of why we're here, though, isn't it?
But I think that does a disservice to the quality of the original films, because you did have, you know, Godzilla versus whoever it was along the way, but there was more stuff to those stories. They were written a bit better. The American ones just seem to kind of forget. It's like, oh no, if things get blown up and stuff gets punched, that's all the audience wants. And it's like, no, that's why you had Rampage. You know, that's they're throwaway things. Godzilla's more than that, always has been, and I think it does a disservice.
I was about to say, oh no, what if they make a Rampage movie and they remember they did make a Rampage movie?
I've heard rumours they're looking to combine it with Pacific Rim as well, which would be possibly a misstep. Yeah.
Absolute nonsense. Who needs
just
that?
adding giant robots into the mix as well.
Yeah, just keep them quite separate. You know, Godzilla's got plenty of characters that you can draw on, as was teased in King of the Monsters.
But as a Godzilla fanboy, is it worth your time?
Yeah, I enjoyed it for what it was. It just made me want to watch the Japanese ones. Really for more stuff. And then I also started playing Star Trek Legends, which is on Apple Arcade, which is just a time sink. But all it made me want to do is have Disney Infinity style figures for the characters, because that's the kind of art style they've gone for.
You already have too many figures.
I know, but they're really nice.
You can never have too many figures.
They're just really cool. They're just really cool little kind of like, you know, styled figures. So if anybody's listening and they want to launch a range of Star Trek Legends figures in the kind of Disney toy box, Disney Infinity style, you're going to sell at least one.
You'll be in a loot crate and never again. Matt, what have you been up to the last couple of weeks?
I've been binging the Dota anime, so Dota Dragon's Blood, which was released on Netflix. Overall verdict, it's meh, it's okay. It's kind of, there's some really good points and some really not so good points. It's got, in terms of the actual anime, it's kind of similar to One Division in a way where you don't need to have that previous knowledge of Dota, the video game, to be able to enjoy it, which is great. It has sort of like little Easter eggs here and there woven throughout, which is quite nice for the fans, but it's not too obtuse that other people won't have a clue what's going on. It's got a really good pedigree. It comes from a really good pedigree. So you've got sort of Ashley Miller directing it, who sort of worked on Andromeda, Terminator, the Sarah Jane Chronicles. Sarah Chronicles.
I was going to say that's a universe.
I know.
I just imagine K9 in the Terminator universe now.
It's been a long day. And then, you know, worked on things like X-Men First Class, so obviously quite good. You've also got Studio Mer, who worked on Legend of Korra and Voltron, which I haven't seen, but everyone says it's really quite good. And then, like, voice actors, you've got people like Troy Baker, who is obviously one of the biggest video game voiceover in sort of the industry. So he plays Joel in The Last of Us. He plays Sam in That's it. And then Carrie Walgren, who's quite big in sort of anime voiceovers for anime. So she's in sort of Blood Plus, she's in Witch Hunter Robin, that kind of thing. So all of these really, really good pedigree. But I think where it falls down is it's 8 episodes. Each episode is 20 minutes long, but there's essentially 4 stories going along, and I kind of feel like the only character I actually cared about was Troy Baker's character, Invoker, who I think he played very, very well and was well written. But everyone else was kind of rushing from A to B to C. So things were happening, characters were kind of interacting, relationships were kind of forming, but you were more told that they were forming rather than you actually got to see them organically. But there was... It's in terms of art style, it's absolutely beautiful. In terms of the music and sort of some of the set pieces, it's wonderful. But then it gets let down with sort of the lack of characters. So, for example, the 2 main characters, Marana and Davian. Davian, in my opinion, without giving any spoilers away, but his story is very much a kind of, he's almost like a bit of an NPC. He's kind of along for the ride, you know. You could eliminate his story altogether and it probably wouldn't affect the overall plot at the end of the day. And it's very much a kind of setup. The whole thing is setting up for a season 2 and a season 3, which is obviously quite promising, but it's kind of let down in what is actually there.
That's the worrying thing with Netflix series, is if this first series doesn't perform well enough, they're of likelihood just to chop it because they can.
I don't know. It sounds a little bit like what they did with the Castlevania series.
That's what I was thinking.
So the setup on the first series of the Castlevania felt a little bit that way, and then kind of. So I think we'll get future series.
I think with Castlevania though, they did actually like commission the whole thing, but then split it into 2 seasons. So that's why it kind of just. It feels like we've just got started and then it just stops. Because it wasn't meant to stop there. It was meant to be the rest of the season. But no, season 2 was the second half of the first season.
Yeah. I can understand with Dota because there's so many heroes and it's multifaceted and they want to try and squeeze as many fan favourites in as possible. But as you said, having 4 stories in 20 minutes is always going to be a bit of an ask.
Yeah, and it's like, so the lore in the universe that they build looks interesting, but you just don't have enough time to really like enjoy it, you know. And Castlevania is quite a good sort of parallel because the other thing they try to do is they try to be quite edgy, so characters swear quite a lot, and there's a lot of like sexual references and that kind of thing, but they seem quite forced. Whereas if you look at something like Castlevania, that's also quite sort of edgy, but it flows naturally in dialogue. Sort of all of the violence and that makes sense. And again, I guess
vampires, so you know it's gonna
be vampires and monsters. Yeah,
and I guess going back to that kind of plot point, at least with Castlevania, there was like a singular strand. Really, you had maybe a little bit of both with Dracula and his backstory, but it was quite a narrow story. Whereas again with Dota, you've got loads of stuff going on, and so you're just there being like, I don't really care about many of these characters or where they're going, what they're doing. So I would say it's worth a watch, but at this moment in time will tell what happens in the future. Really, it's not something I would rush back to see straight away. Cool.
But so as a Dota fan, nearly there, but maybe another season.
Yeah, it's nice to see. It's an anime, and it is very much sort of a love letter to the game and the fans, which is nice. So that is that is good.
Any random base hunter moments halfway through the series?
No. However, like
disappointing.
so many people don't understand that Base Hunter originally made the Dota song before he got big in like the early 2010s. Repurposing all of his gaming music to try and be cool. Yeah. Enough about me, Ryan. How are you?
Been a bit quiet, to be honest. I have downloaded and played a little bit of the Cyberpunk 1.2 patch, which cleared away a lot of drugs Well, that too. A lot of drink and a lot of bugs in the game as well. But I think they seem to have introduced as many bugs as they've taken away, as per possibly their first FPS development is going according not to plan. So, but definitely fix some things. So the police don't just spawn behind you now; they spawn in front of you, and more like 60 feet away rather than just 10 feet away. Still don't get into cars, still don't chase you, but there's still the gem of a great game there. It's just very frustrating. And for those of us who played Witcher 3 at the launch, it's a very much similar kind of pattern where the game is definitely broken, but you just forge your way through. Other than that, been watching a bit of Invincible on Amazon Prime, which we'll be talking about later. And pretty much that's been it, apart from work and eating way too much chocolate over Easter. Same as most of us. But so coming up next on the show will be the Geeky Brummie Poll List with Keith, reviewing the best comic pickups of the last couple of weeks. And then we'll be talking about the PlayStation and our favourite memories. So we'll catch you in a little bit.
And now we'll take a look at some of the comics out now and coming soon in the pool list. Available right now is The Dreaming Waking Hours #9 from DC Comics Black Label. This is written by G. Willow Wilson with art by Nick Robles. In this issue, seduced by the sensual wiles of the realm of fairy, Ruth and Heather After have not only been separated from the angel Jophiel, they've completely forgotten why they've set foot in this delightful place. But fairy's charms, literally, are lost on Jophiel, and he remains firmly on a mission. Unfortunately for him, the King of Fairy has his own ideas on just what Jophiel's power can do for him. This is a worthy successor to Neil Gaiman's original Sandman series, and if you enjoyed that, I recommend you pick this up right now. Also out now is Excalibur #20 from Marvel Comics. This is written by Tinny Howard with art by Marcus Toe. In this issue, no pity from your friends. The Phantom Menace. An invisible threat is loose on the island of Krakoa, unseen, unheard, undetectable by any except Excalibur. I'm enjoying this series a lot, and it's good to see Betsy's Captain Britain back in the realm of the living. Coming up next week, we have Star Trek Year 5 #20 from IDW Publishing. This is written by Brandon Easton with art by Sylvia Califano. As the crew of the Enterprise moves towards an uncertain future, one of their own will be pulled into a violent past. While investigating a mysterious structure on Vulcan, Spock vanishes. As the crew tries to find him, Spock must fight to survive as he navigates the painful past of his home planet. And finally, coming up next week, we have Locke and Key, the Sandman Universe Hell and Gone #1 from IDW Publishing and DC. This is written by Joe Hill with art by Gabriel Rodriguez. In this issue, if you think you can unlock the gates of hell and just invite yourself in, you must be dreaming. The epic crossover between two of the most beloved fantasy universes in comics begins here. John Jack Locke is 10 years dead, but that hasn't stopped him from posting the occasional letter home from hell. Now, Mary Locke will do anything to save her brother's soul, including cut a deal with Roderick Burgess, the most evil man in England, to search for answers in the House of Mystery and risk the walking nightmare known as the Corinthian to find help in the disintegrating kingdom of dreams. I'm looking forward to this series, and I hope it pays off. Don't forget, you can also check out the Geeky Brummie Twitter feed on Wednesdays, where I'll also be posting up a few other great comics you should check out in Under the Radar and some comics news in meanwhile. Until then, back to the main show.
So we thought we'd revisit one of our most favoured and the world's most purchased console, if we exclude the DS, I think, which is the Sony PlayStation and its many iterations.
No, the PlayStation 2 is the best-selling console of all time.
I thought the DS was still the money printer of...
That's Nintendo's best-selling console.
Ah, okay. Anyway, so the best-selling console variety of all time, which is the PlayStation, and originally came out back in 1994 in Japan and 95 in the UK. And since then, we've had a generation every 5, 6, or 7 years, depending on how Sony want to play it out. But considering I've not played since the PlayStation 2, I think I'm going to let Matt and Leigh lead this one a bit more. I know me and Keith are a bit more of an Xbox family. So start us off with Matt. What's your favourite PlayStation memories?
Well, for me, it's so PlayStation 1 has quite a big resonance with me because my brother there's 15 years apart from us, and he was a Marine when I was younger, so we really only bonded over PlayStation. And he originally would have the PlayStation, and I would sort of sneak outside his room and like look through the door because he was playing games like Resident Evil and that kind of thing, where really sort of edgy games that I wasn't allowed to watch. And then he eventually started letting me play with him, and then he would sort of, when I got my own PlayStation, he would then buy me games. So things like Tomb Raider 2, that kind of thing, he bought me, and it was where I first got into gaming properly. Like I had Sega and that kind of thing before, but this was really when I first started to explore my passion for video games. I think for me, one of the most nostalgic things is the demo discs on PlayStation when you first boot them up, and it's got that really awesome 90s techno.
Yes.
And you've just got you've got like the menu as well was all quite like
it's in my head now.
Exactly, yeah. They're very like Abe's Odyssey style, like menu and sound effects and that kind of thing. And
It's a menu that could only exist in the 90s.
Exactly. And you just sit there and play like the first level of Wipeout or the Abe's Odyssey demo or Tomb Raider 2, like the first like level over and over again for hours and hours on end. And then things like always going around at other friends' houses, and we'd play things like Crash Bandicoot and like the very first Medal of Honor and that kind of thing. It was just one of those kind of consoles that I think was quite accessible, and obviously pioneered 3D graphics. So it just that was where games really started to explore what you could have, what sort of it is as a medium.
How about yourself, Leigh? What are those earliest PlayStation memories?
So like the earliest sort of PlayStation memories. So like Matt, I wasn't super into gaming, but I had like a SNES and a NES before that, and was like playing a lot of cartoony games. Like I think on my NES I was playing like Darkwing Duck and this, like a Simpsons platformer, and on the SNES it was like Animaniacs and something else. And obviously the Mario stuff. And then it was going around to a friend's house and seeing them play Tomb Raider, and I was like, what is this game? And like just it was like the first, and I got to play like part of the first level and just kind of going through the caves and everything, and I was just like, this is so unlike anything I've seen. And I was like, I need to have a PlayStation, I need to play Tomb Raider. And eventually got one for my birthday. And I know exactly when I got my first PlayStation because it was 1998. The main reason I know that is because my first game for it was Crash 2 as well as Tomb Raider. And I've also got all my old PlayStation magazines, and the earliest one I've got is like October 98. So like it had to be some point between those two things coming out. So my birthday seemed like the most appropriate thing. But it was then kind of going in and reading those PlayStation magazines kind of opened me up to so many different types of games, because like you said, they all came with the demo discs, and you'd play all these weird things that I would probably have never touched before, because it was just like, oh, I just want to play like these cartoony things. But then it was like, from Tomb Raider and then going on from there and just playing all these different things and just realizing, oh no, there's so much stuff. And like you said, like gaming was doing a lot of new, like PlayStation opened up a lot of games. It was a very experimental time, I've noticed, because like 3D.
I believe the phrase is shovelware for the PlayStation 1.
It was no, it's because like obviously the 3D stuff had just come in. They were able to have like being able to move in a 3D space now rather than just 2D top down or from the side, and so everyone was just kind of playing around with that, and you can kind of see in just how many different ways there are to navigate a 3D space that exists in that, because everything's kind of standardized now, because just from everyone experimenting in that time and eventually just kind of going, oh yeah, maybe the left stick moves the character and the right stick moves the camera. But it took a while to get there, and that's why you've got like the tank controls in Resident Evil and stuff like that, and how everything in Tomb Raider is basically squares. or just grid based. But yeah, it's such a weird, interesting time. I think so many, and you had like experimenting with like rhythm games and things like that came in during that era because they could finally do CD quality audio and all this sort of stuff. So it's just, I think it was probably just a really fun time to get into games because there was so much going on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I know Nintendo are quite synonymous with sort of making sort of innovative tech and ways of gaming, but actually the PlayStation, again, you had things like the dance mat, that kind of thing, but also you'd have things like you could play CDs in your PlayStation, certain PlayStation discs, like game discs, you can put in a CD player and they will play sort of soundtracks. There was one game called Monster Rancher, which was another of the Pokemon era, and they had this really unique mechanic where you could get any CD you wanted, stick it in the PlayStation, and it would generate a new monster. And it was just those kind of again, I think, going back to what Leigh said, it was quite experimental, and it opened the door for other consoles to do that. And even again with the sort of the controller as well, having the analog sticks introduced towards the end, that then became kind of the prototype for controllers moving forwards.
Yeah, because I think it was like the PlayStation release of Alien Resurrection that sort of introduced that two-stick control that is pretty much standard now. And I know that because apparently, like, there was a video that I watched recently which brought up a review from the time, which said, like, this is a really weird control system. I don't know why they adopted that, and it's hilarious looking back at that because it's like, yeah, every game has that control scheme there.
And I think kind of it's moving on to like PlayStation 2, and obviously that's where kind of the Xbox sort of entered the market, and then you had the GameCube. I think in that kind of period, the GameCube was a very much underrated console, and I think part of that may have been due to as well Nintendo's business model working with third parties. But you had, as a PS2, it was incredibly accessible, but also it was kind of showcasing the graphics. So things like Final Fantasy X, seeing that on the PlayStation 2, and that was quite an early title as well. That really showcased sort of the graphic power that you could have, and the jump from basically early 3D graphics to something more refined. But also in terms of like the price point, that kind of thing, it lasted for about 6 years before the PS3 came in. And you saw the consoles get progressively cheaper, especially when they introduced like the slim model, which again was, they started with the first PlayStation with the slimmer PS1, carried on with the PlayStation 2, and it was cheaper, took up less space, but then also all of the games were getting progressively cheaper and just more accessible, and you could afford to have, similar to what the Wii was in the next generation, you could afford to have a PlayStation 2 and go for something else as well. And then of course you just had sort of, again, really interesting games like Call of Duty. You had the first Star Wars Battlefront, that kind of thing, Final Fantasy X, loads of decent exclusives as well for the console. So I think
it's kind of where like Sony's first party studios really kind of came into their own as well, because you had like Jack and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, God of War started on the PS2. You've got all these big franchises that they still have to this day, and a lot of it started in that era on that system. But I think it also, one thing you got to remember as well with that is it sold so well because it was the cheapest DVD player on the market.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So there was that too, because it could play DVDs, and at the time, like, it was quite expensive to get just a standalone DVD player. And then here comes Sony with just like, yeah, it's a games console and a DVD player, and it's like £100 cheaper.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things they missed out on the PS5, because we had with the PlayStation 2, as you said, it was the DVD player. The PS3 was the Blu-ray player, and then the PS4 was kind of like, oh look, it's the next version of Blu-ray player. Whereas the PS5's come out and it's like there's nothing new to kind of sell with that. Keith, what are your thoughts of the PlayStation?
This is where I look my age talking about this stuff, because at the time, it was obviously the PlayStation was just going to be an add-on to the Super Nintendo, the way it was being developed between Nintendo and Sony. And so when the idea came that they'd split and Sony were doing their own thing, you kind of thought, well, this isn't going to work, considering how you looked at things like the Philips CDI and the Panasonic 3DO going in that 3D pathway. You thought this is just going to be a hideous disaster. And I kind of went for a Saturn originally. So I played Tomb Raider on the Saturn, also things like Panzer Dragoon. And I wasn't that bothered by the PlayStation at the time. But then a game called Metal Gear Solid came along, and I traded my Saturn for a PlayStation, which I still think is one of the best designs alongside the GameCube. The design of the original PlayStation 1 is just lovely. I love the flip top, the big buttons, just a great looking machine. And then kind of I was hooked from Metal Gear on. And I think as well the other big benefit that the PlayStation introduced to gaming, which I cannot confirm or deny, was modding. And I may or may not have had my PlayStation modded in order to play a lot of Japanese games that weren't available in the UK. And I remember wanting to play things like Parasite Eve. And also there was a market for games that didn't even get officially released. There was a beat-em-up, a notorious beat-em-up, that didn't get an official release but was available.
Thrill Kill.
Yeah, Thrill Kill. that was available, and I think that started the kind of whole console modding side of things as well. And I think
Big Pen Lid was the one that always got me with the PlayStation. Sorry.
Yeah.
The Big Pen Lid to prop the lid up as you put your hacked game in.
Yeah, but I think it also opened the idea of like not having region locked content, because there was a lot of Japanese games available on PlayStation that just didn't make it to the Western market for one reason or another. And I think we missed a lot of good games in that first generation that have just kind of gone. It's
notable that you mentioned Parasite Eve, because that's a game that I'm still frustrated that they never released officially in the UK. Even like as a PS1 classic.
Yeah.
For the PS3 they never did it.
It's a really good game, and you kind of think, well, Resident Evil was a big success, and I can't understand why Parasite Eve was not, kind of viewed in the same way.
I have played the original Parasite Eve, but that's what happens when you have an American friend who owns it. and you travel over there and you play it at her house in America.
Is that all you travel to America for?
Yes, just to play Parasite Eve.
And I think I stuck with PlayStation then through PlayStation 2, which was kind of like the first networkable game console, so you could play online. Not that I played an awful lot, but I did do some Battlefront with that. Stuck through with the PlayStation 3 because I wanted the Blu-ray abilities. And I've kind of drifted away from PlayStation since then, and I've kind of joined the Xbox fraternity, which I never thought I would ever do. But, the Xbox, again, it's offered other stuff that PlayStation hasn't. And there's some PlayStation exclusives now that I kind of think, well, I kind of want to play that. But I don't know whether as much now it has the cool factor it kind of went for in that kind of late 90s. It seemed to get wrapped up in that whole cool Britannia type of thing. It was kind of the Oasis and Blur thing, whether you were PlayStation or Xbox and all that kind of stuff. So it had a certain cachet with youth culture, and it certainly went after it.
That was definitely like their smartest marketing move, at least in the UK, at least, because like there's that you could see how the model was different in other countries as well. But like for the UK, Wipeout was one of the first games, and they used that to its advantage because the soundtrack was all licensed. It was all club music, and they put like PlayStation 1s in clubs.
Yeah, I was going to say, I remember at the time it was really heavily marketed. It's like it's in nightclubs. It was like Ministry of Sound.
Yeah.
It was all those kind of really heavy nightclub focused.
Mm-hmm.
This is the console for 18 teenagers. It's late age teenagers, early 20 something.
Well, that's the thing. Like reading through the old PlayStation magazines, like there's interviews with musicians and bands and stuff in there that don't have anything to do with games. It's to kind of create that culture around it. And they would have CD reviews and film reviews in there as well, just because it's like we want it to be like not a nerdy gaming thing, but like it's a cultural thing,
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what they were going for, and clearly it worked.
Yeah. I mean, for myself, again, I'm going to show my age here because my first console was the Atari 2600, and then I swapped over into Commodore 64. But since the SNES era, I was always a Nintendo boy. So it was like I had the NES, I had the Game Boy Advance, the Super Game Boy. It was always Nintendo for me. And as Keith mentioned, when PlayStation went away and said, "Right, we're going to make our own disc-based console with blackjack and polygons," it was kind of like I wasn't really interested at the time with the PlayStation. Oh, I think we've lost Matt for a second.
Oh, no, we're back.
Here we go.
I'll restart my bit.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
No, it's fine. 5, 4. So for myself, I'm going to show my age again here. My first console was the Atari 2600, which my dad brought home. Lovely wood grain on top. That was the mark of a console in the 80s, having wood grain. And then Commodore 64, then went on to. But since the NES, I was always a Nintendo boy. So it was NES, SNES, Game Boy, Super Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, and all the way through, it's always been like I was a Nintendo all the way from start to finish. And when PlayStation and Sony decided to go away, and it's like I'm making my own console with blackjack and polygons. And when they ran away, and to do that, it was kind of like I wasn't interested because it was like Nintendo. They're still making cartridge-based games. It's fine, and you had the Nintendo Premium built in, of course, with cartridges versus discs. But as you mentioned, then I started noticing the PlayStation's library getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I'd go into Computer Exchange, and Nintendo would have a little corner full of cartridge boxes, and then PlayStation would have a wall to themselves just from PS1, and then repeated itself with the PlayStation 2. And it was a case of a lot of it was shovelware, I think it's fair to say, and it was a case of it was one of those consoles that was so easy to decode for any game studio with 5 minutes worth of dev time could put something on a disc.
Oh yeah, the PS2 library is huge, but when a library is that huge, you're going to get just terrible things thrown in there.
Yeah. But so I owned a PlayStation, again, playing naughty games like Thrill Kill, like Keith back in the day. We used to have one in our college breakout room, which was constantly propped open with a pen lid and soft modded to make things a little bit cheaper for my college, put it that way. And I took my SNES in, but my SNES was the most used console because it had Super Mario All-Stars, and it was just people speedrunning that every single day. Became pretty much the ultimate game. And after that, I did own a PS2, again mainly as a DVD player more than anything else, because there are some great games on the PS2, Tekken Tag and a few games like that. That's where I really loved those PS2 games. And then, as Keith said, I drifted off to Xbox land, and then Xbox and Nintendo since then. I was never interested in the George Foreman PlayStation, and then never since then, really. So it's kind of, I have those early memories, but as you mentioned, it's more the culture around PlayStation at the time. It was like those lad mags like FHM and Loaded, and it was kind of like intertwined with that lads culture and drinking Alco Pops and playing beat 'em up games.
I'd say the other thing that PlayStation did that kind of went beyond what anybody else had done to that time was peripherals, because although Nintendo had peripherals, Rob, or the Super Scope and whatever it is,
don't go slagging off the Donkey Kong bongos.
That's a little bit later, but I remember having like the 4-player brick, the multi-tap, and then also the G-Con 45 to play Time Crisis and stuff. And I think that was another thing that Sony really was successful with is introducing peripherals that were really good and added a lot of value or play value to their games. I mean, I'm still a big fan of light gun games to this day, and playing Time Crisis with the G-Con is still one of the my favorite gaming experiences.
I do remember the official PlayStation magazine around that time was sort of mocking how many peripherals had come out for the console, but they had a page advertising a whole bunch of new peripherals coming out, and it was all made up. And all I remember off the top of my head is the G-Con bazooka. So it was the G-Con, but it had like about 10 barrels, so you just couldn't miss.
But Nintendo had already made that with the Super Scope.
But the Super Scope was terrible.
I had a Super Scope. I loved it. But as you mentioned, though, the breadth of games is really good because you could jump from something like Space Channel 5 to Final Fantasy to the early COD games to other kind of... genre swapping was very easy on the PlayStation, where Nintendo was very much known for it's all JRPGs or adventure games or platform games, and you wouldn't get much stuff until later into the GameCube era, like Resident Evil 4. It was always the safe console. And then Xbox was just FPS, FPS.
And brown.
And the occasional and brown. And the occasional RPG.
Because the other thing that Sony introduced with PlayStation was the continuation onto the next disc, which is something that you hadn't seen. You know, you certainly couldn't do that with cartridges. But I can't remember what the first game it was, but I know like Final Fantasy came with like 4 discs, and it was like, you know, now insert disc 2 or whatever it was, and that was kind of like, you know, something that you thought, this is kind of getting a bit interesting now, where you've got much bigger games.
You're saying that, like, you know, you got introduced to PlayStation through Metal Gear Solid. That was on 2 discs.
Yeah, was that on 2 discs? I couldn't. That, yeah.
Because, like, in Metal Gear Solid 4, they made fun of it. Because, like, you revisit Shadow Moses in Metal Gear Solid 4, and there's a part where you would change the disc in the original game, and you get to that point, Otacon calls you up and says, "Okay, Snake, time to change discs." And you say, "Oh, wait, no, we're on a Blu-ray now. Sorry." And
such a Hideo Kojima. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a console, and it's something that's going to endure. And I don't think Sony's ever going to get out of the home console market. And
I'll tell you what they did get out of.
Yeah. Well, nothing can beat the money printer that was the DS and the 3DS and the DS Lite, and all the DS generations that have been since.
Yeah, the main problem with the Vita was just that it was a really good system. It had no games on it.
It was exactly that, though, wasn't it? Like, it had so much potential, but and then launched the, what was it, UMD's films, and it was just
that was
the most fragile of yeah. Yeah, one of those discs that you touched and they just evaporated in your hand.
Yeah, exactly. I think, in terms of, like, I think there was a bit of a turning point with the PS3, because remember when the PS3 launch, it was quite bad, and the price was like
Ridge Racer.
Yeah,
Giant enemy crab.
Really like meme sort of.
I love that, like,
reveals and all sorts.
The PS3 reveal has produced so many memes that exist to this day, because that's also where the giant enemy crab thing came from as well.
It's a spot for massive damage. It was the whole bit, because I remember watching that live stream at the time, and the guy was like, it's going to be very historically accurate, going very much into Japanese history. And then 3 seconds later, it's a giant enemy crab.
Attack its weak point for massive damage.
Yeah.
And I think because I switched to Xbox 360 after that, because I was kind of wanting to have PC games, and I couldn't afford a PC, and Xbox obviously has a lot of crossover, like Battle for Middle-earth 2 and that kind of thing, and then obviously you had Gears of War and that kind of thing, Halo, whereas I think PS3 in the early years didn't really have that much in terms of exclusives that anybody really cared about.
Yeah,
I remember the PS3 library being very small in comparison.
Yeah,
to the PS.
PS3 is definitely the PlayStation that took me the longest to get into.
Yeah.
Just because, like, its library was so small to begin with. I think within its first year it had Uncharted.
And Killzone. Don't forget Killzone, the franchise everybody loves.
Oh, actually, no, it didn't even have Killzone.
I thought that was the launch title.
No, the first Killzone was like PS2, and I think Killzone 2 was like the middle of like the PS3 era.
And it wasn't very good either, was it?
No, having played them for a video in the past, I can vouch for the not amazing quality of Killzone.
I think that's a franchise PlayStation have taken out the back and shot.
Let's not talk about that. I think as well what we've not had in the last 20 years really is the kind of innovation that we saw at that point, particularly with the launch of the PlayStation and PlayStation 2. Because kind of when you think in the time period, we went from like Binatone Pong to, you know, PlayStation 1 in quite a short period of time, and now really it's just about power. It's just about moving those graphical elements around, and you get a minor kind of updates with the controllers and stuff. But I mean, the control systems are pretty much fixed from once the Dual-Con was introduced. There hasn't been an awful lot of real innovation in the kind of the systems themselves. Nintendo have tried it with things like the Wii and stuff with the motion controls, and Sony have dabbled a little bit with that.
I think a big part of that is because the PS3, they went really innovative with the actual tech inside it, with the cell processor and all that.
Yeah.
But the problem with the cell processors kind of leans into why there were so few games to begin with, is no one knew how to develop for it.
Yeah, and I think you struggled as well because I remember it was the PlayStation Move camera.
You had the
Was that the 3, and it was like their version of the Kinect basically.
It was the Move was basically them trying to do the Wii remotes, because you had the actual they were basically Wii remotes, and they still endure because the PlayStation VR, so they have maintained that to this day.
The shiny ball controllers.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they did have the camera for the PS2.
The iToy, yeah.
But I never owned that, and I did because it was mostly you had the terrible mini game collections and very little else for that.
It's what I term as gimmick or feature.
Yeah.
So the Wii remote is a feature because it's ingrained into the console. The iToy was a gimmick because it doesn't work with 95% of the games you're ever going to play, and then what you're going to play with the iToy.
Yeah.
It's like the Game Boy printer. Gimmick.
Yeah.
Game Boy camera. Gimmick. Kinect tried to get out of the gimmick into the feature, and I don't think it ever made it.
Yeah, we all remember the Xbox One launch, and Kinect is going to be mandatory, and it's always on, and all people thought was because I'm going to love having a camera in my living room that's always on,
watching me,
potentially sending data to Microsoft.
But I think again, it's a brand that will endure, and I don't think Sony will ever stop making PlayStations until people stop buying them, and I don't think it can. We're having generations of people now who have been PlayStation owners since birth. And I think, as you said, Leigh, I know you're a PlayStation man through and through, and Matt, you've been PlayStation most of your life. It's kind of, it gets ingrained.
Can vouch for...
And it's kind of, I know, especially with their exclusivities, that Sony put a lot of money into exclusive titles to make it a kind of, this is the place that you go to play PlayStation, play certain games.
And that's why I've stuck with it so long, is just because there are so many exclusives that I really love. I mean, I don't have a PS5 yet, but that Ratchet and Clank release date is making it very tempting now. So
yeah, I mean, but I don't know if Sony's going to move away from that a little bit. We have seen some PlayStation exclusives come to Steam recently. We've seen Horizon Zero Dawn. Do you think that's going to be more of a thing, is where you'll have cross-platform titles a few years later on?
They are going to do more stuff on PC, because Days Gone is coming to PC as well. But from what I can gather, it's going to be exactly like they've done with those two games. It's going to be PlayStation exclusive, and then a year or two down the line, it gets a PC release. So I think that's how they're going to handle it. It's not going to be Microsoft, day one on both. So.
I mean, I think this is definitely a subject that we're going to be revisiting much more in the future. Mm-hmm. But it's been interesting to hear your thoughts on PlayStations and what your memories have been. Amazon seems to have a bit of a history of doing things with comic books and making them adult related. We've had The Boys recently, which is a live action version of a rather adulty comic book. And since then we've had Invincible, which is by the creator of Walking Dead, Robert Kirkman, along with Ryan Ottley and Corey Walker. I hope I've got that right. Who created a comic book back in the early 2000s called Invincible, and it is more of an adult take on the classical superhero genre and a bit of subversion of some comic heroes that you might be aware of in your time. But really good voice cast with this. We've got Stephen Yeun, we've got Sandra Oh, J.K. Simmons, Zachary Quinto, Walton Goggins, all playing significant roles in this. And I watched the first 3 episodes, and pretty much I've fallen in love with it. And I think it's one of the best things on TV at the minute. And Keith, you're a fan of the original comic so far?
Didn't stick with the whole book while it was running. It was coming out of part of Image's superhero range of comics. I think Invincible first appeared in Savage Dragon, which is Eric Larson's long-running comic book, which is probably coming in to over 250 issues now. It's a real long-running book. So Invincible launched off the back of that, and it riffs on the whole idea of like, what if superheroes weren't good? And it's ran for quite a considerable amount of time as a comic, and I think that the series is doing something really good. It's keeping the kind of art style of the comics. It looks like some of the best kind of cartoon anime, so DC Young Justice, and Teen Titans and other stuff like that. And what it's doing is not kind of directly translating the comics into an animated form. It's a bit like what Kirkman did with Walking Dead. He's taken the idea of his comic book story and changing things around and doing things in a different way. And by doing it in animation, they've been able to do a lot of the kind of wilder aspects of the comic. And they kind of mixed timelines up a little bit. So in the series so far, we've already had the appearance of the Flaxons, which are alien invaders in the first few episodes, which didn't appear till kind of later on in the comic itself. And he's doing a wonderful job with kind of the way this series is working in a similar way to what The Boys did. Now, The Boys was a comic that I didn't really enjoy. I wasn't very keen on that. It wasn't to my tastes, but the series itself has taken elements of that book and made it really interesting. So I kind of really enjoy the way that it's doing, and it's kind of making a series that's good for mature audiences. And so it's doing a really good job. The voice cast is brilliant, as you've said, Stephen Yeun, J.K. Simmons. And I kind of like hope that this will be a long-running series. Can't see how it will be, because it kind of look like they're going to burn through some of the storylines quite quickly. And kind of we're only like 3 or 4 episodes in now, and quite a lot's happened already. So potentially other storylines from the comic book are coming along, and it may branch off.
Yeah, and I think that's something nice to see as well, that they're not just following the comic book route, because that does subvert expectations for people who have been long-term comic book fans and come in and probably just expecting the entire run to be made in its entirety, similar as you would see with the manga series, where the anime is pretty much just a condensed version of many manga volumes. Having a bit of subversion and forging their own path with the characters, I always find a bit better. But as you mentioned, and I said earlier, the voice cast on this is stunning. Stephen Yeun, he seems to be having massive ascendancy at the minute. He's been Oscar nominated for a couple of movies, and he's playing Invincible really, really well. And it's kind of like having a superhero origin story where I'm not bored at the origin story to start off with. I think is really good. And having foil of J.K. Simmons playing his father as Omni-Man, I mean, there is nobody better you could ask for to like have as your foil, and to play as your comic book hero dad, as a man with a mustache in real life.
It's hard not to have a good J.K. Simmons performance, let's be honest.
Yeah. But I mean, the first episode is pretty much standard superhero fare up until the last 5 minutes. And that's when I got really, really engaged with the show. And that was the thing that clicked with me. And it was like, right, this is something different now. This is something I'm really interested in. It's
certainly got a nice central mystery as to why certain characters are acting the way they do. And I kind of like the whole idea of like, it's we're not quite sure what the responses are. And we've had the demon detective in there. And it's kind of like, did they do that? How has that worked? So it's like the mystery's there, and it's putting in other characters, like another member of one or the Teen Force. So they're not all got the same motivations. So it's like, that there are things that we know from the comic as to why certain characters act the way they do. But it could be different. That's the thing I like with the Kirkman's writing in terms of the way he does his comics, is that he doesn't play it out the way it did in the comic books.
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting because I first heard about this with Seth Rogen's involvement in it, and he's one of the executive producers. And it's kind of a name that you don't associate with a animated comic book series as much. But apparently there's a live action series also in the works at the same time. And there's been a motion comic series with some of the voice actors crossing over. So it seems to be Robert Kirkman, because he's done so well with The Walking Dead and he's executive producer on Invincible. It's like this is his second franchise, and it seems to be maybe getting it out there whilst the Iron's hot and the Amazon series is doing well. And it has been heavily marketed, I would say that. Every time I switch on any of my Amazon Fire Sticks, it's pretty much there in my face.
I do quite like the fact
Invincible, watch
that
now.
you know, Seth Rogen has decided to voice a character who doesn't look like he's got much to do in these first series, but if you know from the comics that character's going to appear again, and that he's guaranteeing he's going to have more action down the line. So yeah, I think he's done a crafty job there of choosing which character to voice. Yeah. It's like, you know, typical Josh. Yeah.
I just
one and done, but he's going to be back. You know.
But again, with the last episode, which I watched, episode 3, at the very end, that last couple of minutes is kind of sowing that seed of doubt as you would get in the first episode. I think it's very well constructed, and I'm really having a blast with this because I've not read the original comic book, and it's kind of slap wrist for myself for not getting around to it the first time around. But
it's kind of also interesting as a show. It's like kind of like a live action time. It's running for 45 minutes or so, rather than the traditional kind of like 22 minutes, half an hour that you would expect from an animated show. So it is kind of having a live action sensibility. When I kind of think that they're playing against the expectations of what an animated show should be like, and a kind of like, you know, leaning into the idea of like, this is you know, a drama, and we're just using the art style of animation to tell our story, but it's treating it in the same way as any other kind of you know, drama show, and it's not kind of like, you know, people have grown used to the world of superheroes. We've seen Marvel movies, we've seen Marvel TV series, so I think, you know, the audience will accept that you can have a 50-minute animated TV show about superheroes.
CW, sorry.
So, you know, the kind of like the and also as well that it allows them to do lots of things that you couldn't do in a live action budget. But you know, animation is not an inexpensive medium, but it does mean that they can do a lot of things that they probably wouldn't be able to show.
Yeah. And I think being on Amazon Prime as well is probably the best place for this, because I couldn't actually see this existing on network TV. So we had like the period of adult animation in the late 90s, early 2000s with stuff like Aeon Flux on MTV. But I don't think this would have survived on like a channel like the CW or something like that. I don't think it's the right place for it. Whereas possibly Amazon Prime, a streaming service, it's one of those where you are going to hunt it out if you're a fan.
It's kind of late night Channel 4 animation styles of things that you used to watch. So kind of like Legend of the Overfiend and things like that. So having it on a streaming channel probably makes it a bit more accessible to other services. Yeah, The Boys is going to get a third season. The Tick was a great series, but I only got 2. That wasn't really hugely popular. You know, it's kind of a little bit outside of other people's wheelhouses. But I'm thinking that they go kind of pushing this series quite a lot. It's coming up alongside the fact that Netflix is going to release Jupiter's Legacy soon. So hopefully it will kind of run for a few seasons.
Say, if you're bored of superhero tropes, I'll try giving this a watch, because it messes around with them quite a lot.
Yeah. It's definitely an interesting show, and maybe for somebody who isn't kind of like a traditional superhero fan can come to, because there's a lot of interesting drama going on in there. And you know, he's kind of riffing off the whole anti-hero ideas, so it kind of fits with things like your Dexters and your Hannibals and stuff. You know, so I think it's a show that definitely would extend beyond the kind of usual superhero cartoon fans. And I think, you know, if you're looking for a good drama, check it out.
Cool. So it's on Amazon Prime now, streaming as we record this. So go check it out. It's not been all good news on the PlayStation front recently, unfortunately. Rather than the PS5 being out of stock for everyone, they've also decided to pull the rug from a couple of their digital store services for the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation Vita. That beautiful console.
And the PSP as well. So, for the details, they are going to be closing the PS3 and PSP marketplaces on the 2nd of July, and the Vita closes on the 27th of August. So that's just it. That's just the store's gone. I believe you can still download stuff that you've already purchased, but you cannot make any new purchases going forward.
Mm-hmm. And it's a bit of a shame because there's some really strong digital exclusive only titles for these stores, and especially for the PSP and the PS Vita, because you're not scrabbling around for a UMD disc on some of these, as we mentioned previously.
I mean, the problem with the Vita is in order to store all those digital games, you need their proprietary memory cards that cost the earth. But but no, there's 2,000 games.
Wow.
That are digital only across the 3 platforms. That doesn't necessarily mean that all of them are going to be like you can't find them somewhere else. Because there are a number of games that once the stores go down, they become Xbox exclusives because they'll still be available through Xbox platforms. So stuff like Beyond Good and Evil HD, Lara Croft and the Guardian of Light, the Bionic Commando revival games when they did those. Along with a bunch of like HD remasters of Sega games, so like Sonic CD and Space Channel 5 and Jet Set Radio, they all become Xbox exclusive because you'll still be able to get them through the Xbox store, but PS3 store's gone. But then there's things like Tokyo Jungle, which is entirely digital only PS3 exclusive game. That I think did have a very limited physical release, but I think is really hard to get hold of. So you're going to lose stuff like that. You're going to lose stuff like the Echo Chrome games, which I didn't personally like the first Echo Chrome, but there are people who really enjoyed the Echo Chrome games. So I just think it's really not good for like archival purposes. Because there's all these games that are just going to be lost, and there won't be any other way to get hold of them. I
can't imagine it's much server space still required for like the PlayStation 3 and PS Vita stores, for example. I mean, I can't imagine these are 4 or 5 gigabyte games maximum.
Yeah, my PS3, I never have to really delete stuff on there, where unlike the PS4 where I'm constantly having to uninstall stuff because everything's 90 gig these days.
Yeah. And it is a bit of a shame, and it seems, as you've mentioned there, Microsoft are now the ones with the most backwards compatibility out of the 3 major console brands.
Yeah.
Because Nintendo are awful for like hiding away their classic games.
Well, they just put the Mario games back in the cupboard, so
Yeah, they do the Disney thing of, we'll let it out for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Oh no, taking it back now.
Yeah.
We can't play it anymore. And especially with like the Wii and the Wii U had a really strong virtual console lineup, and
now we've got the Switch Online service, which
it's more I was going to say it's more the fact that there did a lot of digital exclusives are in there, because it's okay when they archive stuff that's physically available. You've got the secondhand market. You go to cons, you can buy old games. You can buy at extortionate prices, but you can still get all these games. And if you've got the console, you can still play them. But once you start getting into the realms of things that have never had a physical release, to then remove them from sale just seems kind of not a great idea. That now they're never going to be able to be played, or that you can only play them if you've got a console that's already got them pre-downloaded onto, which is kind of what we were all doing with like Scott Pilgrim a few years back when that disappeared. You could only get all of it if you'd got it on your machine already.
And there's going to be eBay scalpers who'll be like selling consoles with like Tokyo Jungle for like £500-600 because it's the only way you can now have it.
Here's a PSP with Echo Chrome. or the one Lumines game that's digital exclusive. But I mean, like, it's interesting you're saying about like going to cons and getting some of the older games. The PS3 store is actually really, really good for PS1 games because they had quite a big library of PS1 games on there, and I think everything on there was usually between £3 to £7, usually depending on how popular the game was likely to be. So, like, your Final Fantasy VII, you were paying £7, but like your Disney Skate Adventure or whatever, that's £3. But like all that goes, which means that now you're back to the situation where if you want to play, I think I looked up some games like Wild Arms, for instance, which is a sort of JRPG from that era, exclusive to the PlayStation, and I think on eBay it's about £90 on average at the moment, and you can buy it for £7. I did check the price, but I couldn't see the price. All I got was a download link, and because they already took down the web store, couldn't double check it. But that's the price range. So
well, that's another thing as well. Physical copies degrade, and that's a big problem with the PlayStation 1 discs, because for the vast majority of them, most people probably never kept them in a kind of pristine condition that you would expect a collector to, especially with that black surface on the bottom.
It annoys me so much as someone who does have pristine copies.
Yeah, but you can understand kids at the time, they're not going to take good care of it, they'll scratch it up.
Yeah.
And whenever something has a physical release, guaranteed copies will evaporate over time and be lost and put in attics and put in storage and never thought of again. So, as you said, those hard-to-find games that had a limited release to start off with are going to be even more complicated to find, and not having a digital asset version of it, unless you sail the seven seas, of course.
I think the worst example I found was like So I have it's Persona 3 Portable for the PSP, which you could get digitally for £25, which is still kind of expensive, but it's a Persona game, and they're always expensive. It's like I was seeing it in the thousands on eBay, and it's like that's just insane. But like, the one example that did immediately come to mind, but then I realized it didn't quite hold up, was Symphony of the Night, because like I've only ever seen that at conventions, always at £100. And I got it for £7 on the PS3 store, but thankfully Konami did re-release that for the PS4, so there is a way to still get hold of that one.
But as you mentioned, those con games, as a beloved GameCube owner who kicks himself in the head every time he thinks about his GameCube that he sold back in the day, with such games as Skies of Arcadia Legends and Tales of Symphonia and the Legend of Zelda Special Edition Wind Waker with all the previous releases, and the ones that I go to at cons now and say, "Oh, I wish I could afford this again."
Yeah, there's a reason why my GameCube collection is 6 games only.
Yeah, but it's going to be a case of, is the PlayStation 3, for example, going to turn into that? We talked about that in the previous segment, that the PlayStation 3 had a limited selection of games in comparison to the PS2 and the PS1.
At least at the beginning, it definitely picked up, I would say, but at least at the beginning. But
finding those PS3 early titles is probably going to be a struggle if you wanted to buy physical copies and you haven't purchased them on the PlayStation Store.
I mean, if it's something like, I think Resistance would be like the launch title. I don't know how easy that would be to get hold of these days.
Yeah, that's the other series.
Yeah.
Killzone and then Resistance, they went either or, didn't they?
Yeah.
But gaming's a weird entertainment medium, because when you think of other entertainments, so if you think of music, or you think of books, or you think of films, if somebody talks about a classic of each one of those kind of, you've probably got some way of getting hold of those and being able to watch them or enjoy them or listen to them. Whereas when it comes to games, why are we in this perpetual idea of like, once a new generation has come, everything before it gets wiped away? So it's like if somebody says, "Oh, I played this like classic game," you want to play Parasite Eve, or you want to play, something else, and but there's no, unless you've got the original, there's no kind of subsequent, people dabble with HD remakes and all the rest of it, but it's kind of that idea of like totally abandoning it completely. It's like, technology's moved on and we've got polygons now. Who would ever want to play an 8-bit game anymore?
Well, that is in fact the attitude of the head of PlayStation at the moment. He has actually been quoted as saying, like, he saw PS1 and PS2 games running more recently and was just like, why would anyone ever want to play these? And it's like, because they're still good games, even if they don't hold up graphically.
Yeah.
Which is why, even though they could do backwards compatibility for PS1 and PS2 games on the PS5, they don't do it.
Yeah. It's kind of like going to a museum and saying people, I won't be interested in that artwork anymore because it's old.
Yeah.
It's like only modern artworks. It's a very backwards view, is how I describe it.
I would agree. I think one of the problems with gaming as an industry is still a struggle for legitimacy. Not necessarily as an economic sort of factor. Like, I think in recent years we've kind of established that games are big money, and hence the explosion of esports, that kind of thing. But in terms of actually their historical and cultural impact now, like now we are, a good half century since sort of the start of video games in general. You like you just said, you're not just seeing them as games that you used to play and now they're really old and don't want to play them anymore. Like, they are a sign of the times. They were a thing at the time. They showed you what the kind of general consensus of gameplay was, what the culture was, that kind of thing. And it's like, it's just looking at some of the titles that will be gone. Obviously, there's not really a lot of explanation of why they can't just, even if they just say we are going to port all of them over, but it's going to take years to do all of them. You are going to lose some good ones like Tokyo Jungle, that kind of thing, but also Dissidia 12, which was quite surprising that they're losing that, because the Dissidia franchise, the offshoot of Final Fantasy on the PSP and PS Vita, was quite...
I did see that on the list, and it was kind of like, I could have sworn there was a physical version of that.
They are, but again, you'll have the same problem of they'll be in very short supply.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that there's some, like, I am an air traffic controller, Airport Hero Tokyo. I'm not entirely sure there's going to be a massive outcry, but you do have others that are quite prominent, and I think it's that kind of disregard for video games as historical pieces, because it's a hindsight thing.
I think, like you said, there's a bunch of stuff on there that wouldn't be mourned if it's gone. But I think one of the things that stands out with a lot of this stuff is there's a lot of weird things on there, like, but in a good way. Like, they're kind of experimental, unique experiences that you wouldn't really find anywhere else, and we're going to lose those. They might not necessarily be amazing, but they're definitely interesting.
And I think it's going to have that first generation of twin stick shooters, which is massive in Japan. It's not so much in Europe and America, but twin stick shooters are pretty much bread and butter for Japanese digital gaming things. Yeah. And like those kind of franchises.
I'm pretty sure that a big chunk of these are exactly what you're describing. So
yeah, so I can imagine, like, as you said, that kind of niche, but those games are very, very popular in Japan, and there's tournaments around them. So I can imagine possibly losing some of those might have a larger impact than Sony think. And it's not like Sony's not got enough money to keep these stores running. It's kind of like, how much is it on the onus for the company to keep it running for no cost, for a cost to them? And I can't imagine it's a significant cost versus how much goodwill are they going to lose. And as we said, Microsoft have done very well with backwards compatibility, especially across the Xbox One, where they've been bringing back original Xbox classic games and saying, like, pop it in and it'll work fine.
I don't understand as well why they don't kind of adopt a system. In America, it isn't here in the UK at the moment, but Warner Brothers do a kind of like buy on demand for some of their classic titles, particularly for cartoons, because they have a lot of the Looney Tunes library. So in America, you can kind of, I don't know if they're still doing it now, but it used to be you could order the discs of the things that you wanted. So they didn't stock them and you didn't find them in shops, but you ordered them up. And I can't understand why games don't do that. You know, obviously if they kind of want to use less server space and they want to reduce their costs in terms of maintenance of those, just make it a request service that if you want to, you know, there's a list, but if you want to play that game, you kind of either have to pay a little bit more and you get a Blu-ray or a DVD sent out, or it becomes a downloadable link. You know, everybody uses WeTransfer these days. Everybody knows how to download something, but it's a request service, so they're not maintaining servers for traffic that might not exist, but you can request it.
The problem is, I think, there is a cost with all that in itself, because you need staff and, you know, maintenance of some sort. You still need some sort of storage to have the game code. Yeah.
There's some poor salaryman who's just been working on PlayStation 3 store updates for the last 10 years.
Yeah, I mean,
just get Sony AI. It's just all computer control.
I mean, just get fans to do it. Fans would do it. That's the thing.
I mean, Microsoft have got a whole department just dedicated to backwards compatibility. You know, anything that doesn't run properly, they'll get a team on it to try and fix it, so that you can load up your old original Xbox games and they'll work on the Series X. And I do like that Microsoft are really pushing for that, and they've actually taken that very seriously. And it is one of those things that endlessly frustrates me with Sony at the moment, is this sort of refusal to adopt that backwards compatibility, because I mean, I'm not sure about how they would get the PS3 stuff running on the PS5, just because that architecture was so weird and out there that no one could program for it. And I think the emulation still isn't quite there yet. But like the PS1 and 2, they could just put an emulator in the PS5. They could just patch one in and have it working. They had it running on the PS3.
Well, they had it running on the PS1 Mini, didn't they? Which was just basically a Raspberry Pi re-slapped with a bit of code on it. So I can't imagine it's that much of a task.
Well, like I said, that it existed in the PS3. Like you could put a PS1 game into the PS3 and it runs off an emulator, which means that not every game works very well. Like I know that Ape Escape doesn't work on the PS3 at all. Like it gets to the title screen and then just doesn't do anything. The only button that works is the one that takes you back home. but
you mentioned emulators. I mean, there is the ones like the PSXE, I think, which you can find through the Android store, and you can find ISOs, and it's a case of the fans doing a much better job. However, the legal ramifications are of keeping these games in circulation as something that you can still continue to play to this day, rather than the actual owners of said hardware.
Well, that is an issue that I have seen discussed with a lot of people. Like, there are people who are very determined to archive games and keep sort of a record of everything, and they're all just talking about like just pirating everything now, because, you know, if there's no legal way of getting it, you might as well.
Yeah, it's gonna say, if you can't make it legally accessible in an easy manner, and this was the whole thing with Netflix at the time. Netflix pretty much killed torrenting at the time, because it was a case of, for a flat fee, this market space has pretty much everything you want to watch. But you can go there.
Even within the gaming space, that's kind of what happened with Steam as well, because Gabe Newell's been on record saying that like piracy is a service problem.
Yeah.
You know, if you're offering a better service than the pirates, you beat piracy.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, it's going back to the old days of cable TV now, with the fractiousness of it. And unfortunately, with exclusives, which PlayStation are loving to have their exclusives, taking those even digital exclusives from 10, 15 years ago, it's a detriment to the whole world, not just PlayStation game players.
It's interesting, especially with the Vita, because that is less than 10 years old. So we're losing stuff that isn't even 10 years old yet.
Yeah, and it's kind of what's the obligation, I suppose, is what comes out of this. What is the obligation of a console manufacturer like Sony to keep these services alive?
And I suppose that is the biggest thing, really, like the return on investment. So yes, they can do it, or they can just cancel it, get rid of all these games. The fans will moan, but they'll
get over it.
Yeah, they'll still pay for more and that kind of thing. And I think that's one of the issues with PC gaming as well, because there's a lot of terrible ports to PC that basically get fixed by fans, and the attitude of developers are sometimes, well, this game really isn't going to give us enough money, there's no point in us fixing it, just let the fans do it. And I know it's kind of different, but
did that one Dark Souls game ever get an official PC patch, or was it all at once?
I mean, there was a great example recently of Grand Theft Auto 5 had a bug in the loading screen for the GTA Online, which was like taking minutes upon minutes, and a fan fixed it, and Rockstar's response was to give him $10,000 to say thank you very much for saving millions of man hours.
At least they paid them,
Well, at least they paid them, but
I'll
it's
give them
still kind of like $10,000 is a bit of a for a bug fix that saved millions of man hours their time.
Yeah, and I guess for a company like Sony as well, they have quite a proud ethic, I guess, where they're always moving forward. They always want their products to move forward. They're not that keen on looking back at their past necessarily.
I think that's the problem. You can't, running a PS1 game on like a modern Sony TV. Please buy one.
Exactly.
It's
not going to look very good. Yeah.
I mean, the PlayStation 1 games never looked good on the day of release, to be honest.
Look, as someone who's currently in the process of finishing up a video where a PS1 game sits next to its PS4 remake, I know exactly. I know exactly what the difference is.
That lovely voxel graphic jitter that still happens to this day. But, yeah, it's a shame to lose them. But as we said, I'm sure somebody somewhere will find some way of archiving it before it disappears.
There's already a subreddit dedicated to it, I'm sure.
Yeah, press F to pay respects.
Hello and welcome to the portion of the show where I talk about my games of the week for the past 2 weeks. Last week, Game of the Week was Evil Genius 2 World Domination, the management game where you get to run the Bond villain's secret volcano lair. Thank you, I will purchase this immediately, you need not tell me anymore. But if you must know more, this is the sequel to 2004's Evil Genius. The game is essentially Theme Park meets Dungeon Keeper, as you pick a villain and have to manage both the building of your doomsday device and the day-to-day running of your casino that's a front for your evil schemes, while also stopping the good guys from stopping what you're doing. Oh, and one of the villain options is played by Brian Blessed, so I felt that was mandatory to give it Game of the Week. Game of the Week this week is Oddworld SoulStorm, because I'm a long-time fan of the Oddworld series, so of course this is Game of the Week. Ostensibly a remake of Oddworld Abe's Exodus from the PS1, SoulStorm is a much bigger and bolder game that's pushing to expand the story much more. New mechanics have been added and a pseudo 3D environment promises some interesting level design. It also looks the best the series ever has, and you get the sense that Lorne Lanning and his crew are finally getting to realise their original vision now that the tech has caught up. It's a promising sequel to one of the best cinematic platformers ever made, and therefore it has to be Game of the Week. And now, back to the main show.
Right, now we're going to attempt something new on the show in a segment we like to call Badly Drawn. So this week, as we've been talking a lot about PlayStation games, I've had the great pleasure of drawing up a selection of PlayStation games in a lovely badly drawn style, which we're now going to challenge Leigh and Matt to guess if they can find out what the games are. So we're going to show them the images, and then they are going to scream out their own names for obvious reasons, and then they're going to try and guess what the games that are represented are. We'll see who will be our badly drawn champion for the PlayStation. So I think Ryan's in control of the visuals for this segment, and we will describe to you afterwards, for those of you listening on the podcast, what the boys have seen. But I don't know how Ryan's going to do this now. Are you just going to flash up the image?
I'm going to flash up the image, so for those watching the video, they probably can't see us at the minute because it's just the beautiful cover art that Keith creates every week. But I'll work my way through them, and there's a special bonus round for our audience as well, which you can join have the privilege of, if you enter it, winning a beautiful Geeky Brummie pin badge. But we'll come back to that when we get to it. But Keith, are you ready?
I am ready.
Matt and Leigh, are you ready?
I'm ready.
I was born ready.
So number one is coming up right now. Silence.
Neither of them have shouted their name.
Yeah. So the badly drawn premise is going well so far.
Yeah.
So Keith,
maybe it will help if I will describe the image to you. There is a Hessian bag with the symbol of a male on it with the copy of the book The Liar placed behind it. The clues are all there in the picture. A Hessian sack with the symbol for one of the sexes and a copy of the book The Liar. The clues are there. No, nobody's going. I cannot believe. I thought this was so easy.
Are we going to sack this off, Keith?
Is it obviously Mailbag the Liar? Is it that really famous game?
Well, if I then introduce I'm going to have to clue you in. The symbol on the bag is for a male. The bag itself is a sack, and the book The Liar was written by Stephen Fry.
Okay,
I can't believe Lee's got this.
I know what it is.
Okay, Lee's saying his name, and then he's going to say what the game is.
Leigh, Little Big Planet.
Yes! He's got it.
It's a sack boy.
Yeah, okay.
It's a boy sack.
See, the problem is, like, my line of thinking was starting to be like mail bag, and therefore I was thinking postman, and therefore I was thinking Death Stranding.
I was thinking Sackboy, but I don't get the Liar reference.
Because Stephen Fry does all of the voiceovers for the original Little Big Planet.
Oh, okay.
Stephen Fry and a sack boy. Big Planet.
Okay.
It's not the badly. This is where it all goes downhill, Ryan. It's not badly drawn. It's just not well thought through what I'm drawing.
Right, we have 1 point for Leigh. So
okay, and our next game.
You ready?
Well,
Matt, Metal Gear Solid.
Yay, Matt got that one. See, that was a bit easier. Basically, kids, what they're seeing is a cardboard box upturned with what it is. So everybody who's ever played Metal Gear Solid knows that's the easiest way to infiltrate a highly secure military installation.
Is have a box upside down with its flaps hanging out. Yeah.
You hide in a cardboard box.
And if you hide in a truck, it'll take you to another part of the base.
I didn't sound very confident because I didn't want to say Metal Gear Solid and you go, no, it's obviously Box Boy.
Right, you ready for number 3?
Yep.
Leigh, is that The Last of Us?
Yes, it is The Last of Us.
Oh, well done.
What Lee's seen there is a Taylor guitar with fungus growing out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that quite clearly is The Last of Us.
Yeah, I was thinking Mario. When was Mario on the PlayStation? Because that is obviously a toadstool.
Yeah, why you try and find another way of representing The Last of Us in a way that makes sense?
True.
So Lee's in the lead there with two to Matt's 1.
Ready for number 4?
Yeah. Oh, Matt. God of War.
Yes. Matt's got
Boy.
PS4 version.
Yeah. What Matt's seeing there is I can't remember the name of the boy. He's Aramis. I can't remember the name.
Atreus.
Atreus, is it?
Yeah.
Wasn't he from the Neverending Story?
Yeah. Atreus.
His bow, with the word boy in block capitals and an exclamation mark above it.
He was called Boy more than he was called by his actual name, so as far as I'm concerned, that is his name.
Boy. So that makes us level pegging after 4 rounds. We have 1 round left. So whoever gets this right takes the game.
Are we ready?
Mm-hmm. Leigh, is it Ico?
Ico, it is.
Ooh,
well
that's the win in there. Well done, Leigh.
It was the horns, entirely the horns.
It was, yeah. So what Leigh was seeing there was what appears to be a bandage with 2 cattle horns and a bit of a castle behind it, which is taken directly from Ico. Yeah, which is good. So that worked out reasonably well.
Yeah, well done, Leigh.
Yeah.
First winner of the badly drawn competition.
Can I just point out, like, saying badly drawn competition, have you seen, like, the detail on that guitar, Keith?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So it's time for the audience game. Keith, do you want to explain the audience game for our lovely audience?
Yeah, as you've already seen or heard, Matt and Leigh trying to guess what the games are. So this might not be as simple as it first appeared. So what will be available on our YouTube and also probably through our Twitter feed is a visual representation of another PlayStation game. So all you've got to do is send us at hello@geekybrummie.com your answer to what you think the game in the drawing is. So just after all thinking, if you've seen what we've done already, cardboard box, Metal Gear Solid, sack with a boy symbol on it, and Stephen Fry's The Liar, you should be able to piece together the thinking I've put into this drawing. I'm sure Matt and Lee have both got it already. But if you send us in your ideas, if you are correct, you will go into the prize draw and you could win a Geeky Brummie pin badge.
They are lovely Geeky Brummie pin badges. We all own one and they're all beautiful. So we'll get that posted out to whoever is the winner and we'll draw it on the next podcast, I assume.
Yeah, with one of them random name generator things.
Yeah, and what we'll do is we'll put this up on our Twitter as well over the next week or so. So if you're listening via Mixcloud or the podcast, you can still see the image and we'll put links to it in the description as well so you can find it and then enter by the 23rd of April.
Congratulations, Lee. Our first winner of Badly Drawn.
Well done.
Excellent.
Thanks for joining us on the Geeky Brummie Podcast this week. Lee, where can we find you online?
You can find me at BobThePetFerret on YouTube, where I make various different gaming videos. On the same day that this goes out, I'll be putting out a video on Final Fantasy VII Remake, all about its weird choices of how to remake a game. But also you can get updates on that on Twitter at BobThePetFerret. You can also find me tweeting more generally at TheCheapFerret, and there's Patreon and Discord and all that sort of stuff. If you go to YouTube, all the links are there.
Matt, where can we find you online?
You can find me on Instagram at matchstick_Matt, where I post mostly selfies, to be honest, nothing very interesting. Or follow me on at Mr. Matt Level on Twitter. But you can also catch me on Mondays, where I'm on the Geeky Brummie Twitter handle, talking about mostly esports, and in the Gaming Roundup on a Friday with Leigh.
Keith, where can we find you online?
If you want to find me on Instagram, it's Hard Luck Hotel, where you'll find my lovely black and white series of arty photographs, occasionally interrupted by Godzilla carrying an Easter egg. And on Twitter, it's at hardluck_hotel, and that's mainly just retweeting everything else that everybody's putting on the Geeky Brummie Twitter handle, which I take over on a Wednesday, taking a look at some of the comics out the week and maybe some comics news as well.
And you can find me at Ryan Parrish on Twitter, which is the retweet feed for the Geeky Brummie channel, because that's all I seem to do on that one. If you haven't been paying attention, I've been playing MasterChef Bingo the last couple of weeks on Brummie Gourmand. It's finished now. You're too late. It's your own fault. And making many GIFs of Greg Wallace. That's kind of what I do when I'm not doing geeky stuff. It's weird, we know. But you can find us at geekybrummie.com, as we mentioned. You can find us at Geeky Brummie on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. As we said, Matt does Mondays, I do Tuesdays and occasionally Thursdays when I remember. Keith takes over comics on a Wednesday, Leigh does games on a Friday, and the lovely Mrs. Geeky Brummie in the background does the weekend coverage. So big thanks to her. And Geeky Goings On, which is our sister Twitter account, which tells you what's going on in the local area. And there might actually be something going on which is not virtual very soon for some people. But thank you very much for listening, watching, or listening with the music on all the different variations you do. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can also get a Mixcloud version with extra music at mixcloud.com/geekybrummie. Or if you want to take us in your pocket, we're also on podcasting services, Apple, Spotify. I think we're pretty much on all of them now, so no excuses. But don't forget to tell your friends, like, subscribe, share, do all the useful things. And we have a Ko-fi as well, if you ever feel right chucking a few quid our way. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next issue. Bye, everybody.
Bye.